Let's just get into the message, all right? Okay. Last week we started a brand new series on the ABCs of church. And during this series, we're not talking about how you can grow as a Christian, although these ABCs will reflect the type of Christian you become. We're talking rather about how you can grow within the context of our church life, or the church that you're a part of, which at this point in time is Grace. And hopefully you'll be a part of Grace for a while. The life that we share together corporately. Now, the ABCs of church stand for three words that affect what we do in the context of our church involvement. These ABCs, when practiced consistently, give Jesus the opportunity that he needs to build his church corporately in and through our lives. So what are the ABCs of church? The unnegotiable minimums of a healthy growing church, the things that you can do that ensure fruitful and God-honouring progress for you and those around you. They are attend, belong, and contribute. Now, we spoke about the first one last week, the letter A. And A stands for attend a weekly church service. Now, if you weren't here for last week's message, I want to encourage you to go online and have a listen to it, because it gives you some really helpful thoughts about why it's so important to be in the habit of regular Sunday church attendance. Now, this week we move on with the second letter of the ABCs, and that's the letter B. And B stands for belong. Now, attending is great, but it needs to progress beyond that to belonging. It's where you start to put some relational skin in the game. When God created us, he created us to belong to him and to each other. We were made in his image, and according to the creation story, woman was made out of man. You need both a male and a female to create a child, and in describing marriage, Jesus used the interesting terminology of the two becoming one flesh. Now, the idea of belonging is as old as humanity itself and beyond. The Father, Son, and Holy Spirit belong together so closely that we say there is only one God, but three persons. When we're talking about belonging in the context of the church, we're talking about being in relationship with a group of people that you're committed to and actively pursuing their well-being. The key to belonging is this. This is the key. Find a group of people that you can love and serve. Now, when I first wrote that point out, I actually stopped at love. But then I put in and serve. The reason that I did that, even though I know sometimes serve or service has an interesting connotation in some people's minds, the reason why I put that in there is because love always leads us to action. And service is love in action. Now, we get it around the wrong way often, which is why so many people live unfulfilled lives, relationally. We go out looking for people to love us rather than people to love. It's interesting that Jesus never said, go and find a church that loves you. Go and find a group of people that loves you. Jesus said, love your neighbour as yourself. Don't love your neighbour as they love you, but love your neighbour as yourself. When we live with ourselves at the centre of our lives, we'll always be disappointed in the quality and depth of the relationships that we have. Because, interesting thing about self is never satisfied. Some of you have probably experienced that. We've talked about that quite a lot here at Grace. You get something brand new, and for the first hour, it's fantastic, you look after it really well. Who's ever bought a brand new car? When you take it, the first time you take it to the supermarket, you find a car space way away from everyone else because you're afraid of people opening their doors on your car. 3 months later, you don't care, because the car's already got scratches on it. And it's like when you get something new, it's wonderful. But after a while, that becomes old and you go looking for something else. That's the problem with self. Self is never satisfied. God's kind of love causes us to focus on others at the expense of ourselves. Jesus poured himself out for others, and time again, we see him in the Gospel stories, worn out and exhausted. This is the Son of God. This is a guy who had it all together. This is a guy who knew why he was here. And we find him worn out and exhausted. How could he sleep through a storm out in the middle of a lake in an open-topped boat? There's a story of Jesus. Hops in the boat with his disciples, he falls asleep. A storm comes up and it doesn't wake him up. He was exhausted. He'd given and given until he had nothing left to give and was able to sleep through the beginnings of the storm. Now his disciples shook him and woke him up and he ended up calming the storm. But how tired was he to be able to sleep through that storm in the first place? Now, before your brain goes off on a tangent, he did also factor in times of rest for himself and his disciples. But even those times were open to interruptions by those who needed his attention. Now, there is definitely wisdom in managing your energy levels and your emotional health and avoiding redlining for too long. Because if you live like that, you end up not being of any use to yourself or to those around you. But we need to be careful in our effort to avoid burnout, to not forget that there is always a sacrificial component to love regardless of how you cut it.
Yeah, that's true.
The one thing that stands out in the life of every person who has taken on hero status in our society, whether that's in the church, in sport, in academia, or in a particular career path, is that they were all familiar with sacrifice. It's why we admire them. They were willing to pay a price that required sacrificing something else that they could have done with their time and energy. So don't get so fixated on comfort that you lose sight of the undergirding principle of love, which is self-sacrifice. And sometimes the sacrifices that are asked of us aren't what we might consider at that time in our best interest. If you were to approach every social interaction in your life with the mindset of, who here can I love and encourage today? It would change your life and the confidence with which you live it. It would do away with much of the fear that we experience in social settings, because you'd no longer be worried about what others were thinking of you because you'd be too busy looking out for ways to help them. You'd have a legitimate reason for being there, and you would be able to silence that insistent voice in your head that keeps telling you that you don't fit in, that you can't talk well, that you're not pretty enough. Why do I think of David Berg when I said that? Right. I don't know. That's because Gus mentioned earlier, David. You are very pretty, David. Actually, very handsome, very handsome. Right? But that voice that's in your head that says you just can't, you're not good enough for this situation. If you went there into that social situation with the mindset of, I'm here to help others, I'm here to love others, rather than worrying about whether you were going to be accepted, you would find that the confidence that you see in so many other people, and oftentimes it's just an act, but the confidence that you see in other people would be yours as well. Most people get really anxious when going into new social situations. Why? Because we're afraid that people won't accept us. When I was growing up as a kid, we used to travel. We didn't travel, we moved quite a lot. I lived in something like 13 houses before we finally settled in the western suburbs of Sydney in grade 5. So up until then we were in 13 different houses. That meant a whole stack of new schools. And I used to absolutely hate the first week at the new school that we had to go to. It's like my parents go, oh, you'll be right. It's like, no, it's going to be terrible. Why? Because I was afraid of what other people would think of me. It was like, oh, this is going to be so awkward. This is going to be so difficult. I then took that with me, that fear of new social situations right through into adulthood. But now I can pretend a little bit better. But I always had that sort of fear that if I go into a new situation, how are people going to what are they going to think of me? How are they going to approach me? I became very good at acting on the outside. I'm sure people would have looked at me and gone, oh, he's fairly confident. But on the inside, I was scared stiff. It wasn't until I stopped worrying about myself and started to teach myself, because this didn't come naturally. This wasn't like, this is the way I do it. I had to tell myself, when going into a new social situation, there are people here today that need to be encouraged. There are people here today that I can make their day a better day. There are people here today that I can love, that I can smile at. There are people here today that I can reach out to. And when I started to do that, I found that the fear that used to grip my heart started to dissipate, because I no longer was held captive by their response to me. So that got taken out of the equation. And I started to look at social situations. I still find social situations uncomfortable. But they are nowhere near as uncomfortable as they were in the past, because when I go into any new situation with people that I don't know, I'm always thinking in my head, okay, who here can I love? Who here can I serve? Who here can I encourage? And when I go in with that type of mentality, I find that the fear or the awkwardness of that, it's not there. And it doesn't matter if I end up sitting in a seat by myself, because I'm still scanning around looking for people who because because what happens is, my preoccupation with self goes out the window, because, sometimes you're sitting by yourself in a seat, and some of you, I'm looking around, you're sitting by yourself in a seat. That time when you're sitting in a crowd of people and you're all by yourself, you can feel really, really exposed, because you're thinking, what do people think of me, sitting here all by myself? And that can become debilitating, that can become really disempowering. But if you're sitting there in the seat, thinking, okay, is there somebody here that needs a smile today? Is there somebody here that needs an encouraging word? Who can I help out of all these people that are here? Who can I come alongside? Now, there may not be anybody, but the fact that you go in with that attitude gives you confidence. And the truth of the matter is, when you go in with that attitude, you're going in with the attitude that Jesus demonstrated over and over again. Now, I don't know if Jesus suffered from lack of confidence. The Bible doesn't say that. He just seems to be always self-confident. But I think the reason why Jesus was so confident was because he came to serve, not to be served. He came to love, not to be loved. He wasn't looking for acceptance. He was going out seeking people who weren't feeling accepted to accept them. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah.
That's actually, yeah. Some practical outwork. How do we practically outwork this with belonging? Well, I have 3 little points. The first one is this. You want to belong? Well, it involves physical proximity. It's really hard to belong to a group you never go to. It's really hard to belong if you're not present. There is something incredibly powerful about physical presence over time to build a sense of connection between people. And you don't even have to talk to them all that much. You just got to be there. There is something powerful. I heard somebody use this terminology. I think they're just spiritualising it. They talk about the ministry of presence, saying how your presence really does make a difference in people's lives. We underestimate the influence that we have through our presence time and time again. When our church first moved over here, and Matt Giroux told me about this group, One Community Together, that used to meet together, because at that time Matt was working for Mission Australia Housing before he got sacked. No, he didn't get sacked. He moved on to better things. Sorry. All right. Forgive me, Father, for I've said. It's been a while since my last thing. But when Matt told me about this group, One Community Together, he said, I've got this meeting, why don't you come along to it? And I went along. I knew nobody in that room. And I'm like a church person, right? And all of these people are from various organisations, service organisations, and people from the community. And when you walk in as a church person, right, because I'm the pastor of Grace, you can feel a little bit intimidated, because we don't have a great rap sometimes out there in society, and you go into these things and you think, well, what have I got to bring? What have I got that can help in this situation? And the first time that I went along to one of those groups, it was just kind of like you just sit there, don't say anything, and just listen. But I kept on going back and got involved with more and more of the groups, and over a period of time, by being present there with them, I was accepted. They started opening their hearts. I started getting more and more involved, and Grace Church as a whole began to be seen as a group that supported what our community was doing. Now, what was the key? The key was presence, physical presence, just turning up. It's really difficult to get to a place of close relationship without you being physically present. I often say to our leaders that one of the things, it gets frustrating sometimes as church people, church leaders, it's like, well, you sometimes feel like all that you are is a meeting convener. That's what you do, you just put on meetings for people. But that's actually I think, putting on meetings, giving people a reason to gather is an incredibly important thing, especially in our day and age, in our society. When we put on a meeting, it gives people a reason to come together. When we put on Sunday service, it gives people a reason to gather. And when you gather with people and you're present with them, you can start to build a relationship. Just by week after week after week seeing the same people, you start to feel like you know them. You start to feel a connection between you and them. So the first key to belonging is physical proximity. You've got to be together with people. The second key to belonging, all right, the first one is physical proximity. You've got to get with them. The second key is this. It's initiated by you. Remember what I said just a little while ago? Jesus didn't say, go and find a church that loves you. And yet that's what we often do. We go from place to place looking for a place where we feel like we fit in. And what are we judging? What are we actually looking for that feeling of fitting in? What we're doing is this. We're making a judgment on how other people treat us in that social environment, aren't we? Sometimes in church, I remember having a chat with one of our guys who has now lives in another state, but he was one of our leaders here at Grace, and he was going around asking people whether they felt that they fit in at Grace. Do you feel like you fit in here? And it sounds like a really nice question. It's kind of like he's concerned about how they're feeling and all that sort of stuff. But I sat him down and said, you know what? When you ask people whether they feel that they fit in, you're doing them a disservice. He says, what do you mean? I'm just trying to find, because we're supposed to be pastoral, we're supposed to look after people. But when you ask them whether they feel that they fit in here, you are asking them to make a judgment on the way other people treat them. And if you take people down that path, or you might be there right now, you go down the path of responding to the way others treat you, you'll always miss God's best for your life, because if you've probably noticed, the only person that treats you the way you should be treated is you. You're the only one who knows what you need at any given time. And some of you don't think you treat yourself all that well already. So the chances of you being treated well by others, kind of like hit and miss. Don't ask people, hey, do you feel like you fit in here? That doesn't help them at all. As I said, you're just asking them to judge other people. Jesus said, don't judge other people, because the same measure that you judge other people will be the same measure that you will be judged. So you don't want to go down that track. That's not healthy. What you need to ask people, instead of, do you feel like you fit in here, is, who are you helping to fit in here? So straight away, you're asking them the question about what they're doing. Because see, remember, think, do, be. It's what we do that determines who we become. And if you're always judging people and criticising people and sitting back and waiting for people, that's not a very nice place to live. But if instead you're always looking out to, how can I help people connect? How can I help people feel like they fit in? Then you'll grow. Jesus will be happy. You'll be healthy. And the whole church, or whatever group you're a part of, will benefit. but it's initiated by you. Don't wait for others to lead the way. You don't need to be accepted before being kind and encouraging toward others. One way of doing that, of initiating some connection, is to join a group. Join a group within the church. I often say, I often encourage people to join serving teams. And the reason why I encourage people to join serving teams isn't because there are jobs in the church that I don't want to do and I want somebody else to do them. Because sometimes, I'm sure there have been times where people have done that, have said, okay, well, everybody needs to serve. I was saying to Ray and Anne just this week, when I was a young Christian, we were told that if you wanted to have a role in the church, if you wanted to be, pursue your call in the church, then you had to set out chairs and clean toilets. As though setting out chairs and cleaning toilets was somehow a spiritual thing that you could do that would then set you up for effective, fulfilling ministry. The truth of the matter is, in any house, there are chores that have to be done. You don't need to be called to do the chores. None of my kids feel called to take the bin out. Because we live, this is like 500 metres down, it's a kilometre to take the bin out and come back, and it's getting colder, so it's getting less pleasant to take the bin out. You don't need to be called to take the bin out. There are chores to be done. So in any group of people, there are always going to be jobs that have to be done. Cleaning toilets, setting up chairs, all that sort of, that has no reflection on whether you're going to be used by God or not used by God. However, one of the easiest ways to get to know people is to find a common task and do it together. Because not everybody can just start talking to someone. Actually, it's only the weird people that can, right? They just talk to somebody out of the blue, or the people that have trained themselves to be like Jesus and love people, right? Okay. But the easiest way to start to talk to someone is to engage in a task together. It's why we encourage people to get involved in teams, is because it will give you a reason to talk to people. Now, we're not saying that you're a loser or you're a failure or whatever, right? It's just recognising the fact that for all of us, this is an area that we struggle with. And you get involved in a team and you start to help in a team, you get a group of people around you, and you then have a reason to talk to them, you have a reason to develop, and it can help you get over the hump. I wonder how many people never stayed connected to church because they could never get over that hump. And if they had got involved in a team or were able to step over the line, and I think that the thing, for me personally, this is what helps me get over that line every time. I ask myself the question, what would love do? How can I love the way Jesus does? As soon as I start thinking down that path, it answers all of the insecure questions that I struggle with, pushes them away, and I'm able to see clearly, and I'm able to step over that line. And once I start helping people, once I start loving people, once I start talking and relating to people, then I find that the relationship has a chance to develop. So a great thing to do is to join a group within the life of the church. And we have various groups that meet outside of Sundays. We put on activities. Obviously, we have the youth program that's run. We have Boys and Girls Brigade that's run. We have men's breakfasts and men's events, and we've got our ladies pop-up things and their events that they're running. There are all sorts of different events, and there are also, every week, there are serving teams that happen that are functioning here in the life of our church to create our service so that when people arrive, it's really pleasant for them. The reason why we serve is because it's the kind thing to do for others. And the third point is this: it takes time. It takes time. You need a winter and summer together. It doesn't happen immediately. So don't get disappointed if you've had a bad experience. Initially you step out and it kind of doesn't go anywhere. I don't know how many times I've gone up to somebody, a new person, started talking to them. And I know that the way to get, it's don't tell them about yourself. Ask them questions about themselves. And you ask them a question and they give you a one-sentence answer and that's it. They stop. And one word. How you going? Good. Okay, right, where do we go now? How was your week? Oh, it's okay. It's like you can have you can go out with all the best of intentions and still have a bad experience, right? Well, I think we've all been there. But it takes time. It takes time. And sometimes you just got to go back again and again and again. And the only thing that's going to motivate you to do that over and over again, rather than seeking comfort, the comfort of your friends, the ones you already have as friends, is if you are diligently seeking to love people the way Jesus has loved you. Now, belonging brings incredible benefit to the individual, but also to the group corporately. In Ephesians 4, Paul talks about the church. And he's not talking about a church that he was currently experiencing, because you listen to his language here. He's talking about something that the church should be moving toward. And he says this, he says, now these are the gifts Christ gave to the church. The apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, and the pastors and teachers, their responsibility is to equip God's people to do his work and build up the church, the body of Christ. This will continue until we all come to such unity in our faith and knowledge of God's Son that we will be mature in the Lord, measuring up to the full and complete standard of Christ. Oh, what a vision. Where is this church? It's going to be us. I'm telling you. Then we will no longer be immature like children. We won't be tossed. Oops, I just went out of the slideshow. Can we just put that back on there? I pressed the wrong button. And I'll go to the next one. Okay. We won't be tossed and blown about by every wind of new teaching. We will not be influenced when people try to trick us with lies so clever they sound like the truth. Instead, we will speak the truth in love, growing in every way more and more like Christ, who is the head of the body, the church. He makes the whole body fit together perfectly. As each part does its own special work, it helps the other parts grow so that the whole body is healthy and growing and full of love. Paul tells us that when we're investing our lives and the lives of others in the church, we're helping each other to grow, and the whole group becomes healthy and growing and full of love. We talk a lot in some circles. Well, they talk a lot in some circles about vision. People have vision for what they want to see, what they want to achieve and all this sort of stuff. But you know what? This thing that Paul says here about the church, so that the whole body is healthy and growing and full of love. If you want to pursue something for your group, for your community, if we want to pursue the type of church that is going to impact our community the way Jesus wants it to, then we need to be healthy and growing and full of love. I've been praying this over our church and over our families all week, that we would be healthy and growing and full of love. That's the type of church I want to be part of. That's the type of community that I want to be a part of. That's the type of group of that's the group of people that will be most beneficial to every one of its members. A group that is healthy and growing and full of love. Our youth group, we want it to be healthy and growing and full of love. Our kids program, we want it to be healthy and growing and full of love. But hang on, what about these doctrinal things? Look, we want it to be healthy and growing and full of love. What do we want for our families? We want our families to be healthy and growing and full of love. What do we want for the relationships that we have with each other? We want them to be healthy and growing and full of love, because that's the kingdom of God on earth. When the kingdom of God is manifest on the earth, we find groups of people are healthy, they're growing, and they're full of love. We're also given a promise that as we grow more and more like Jesus, He will fit us together perfectly. The reason that we rub each other up the wrong way at times is because we're not like Jesus. The more like Jesus we are, the better our relationships will be. We'll fit together well. What you lack, I'll make up. What I lack, you'll make up. So when looking to belong, Your challenge isn't in finding a group that suits you. The issue isn't whether the other person or people are a good fit for you. The issue is, are you becoming more like Jesus? Because Jesus fit in everywhere. Quick question. When talking to others about their relational problems, do you find that they talk more about the issues that the other person has, or their own failure to act more like Jesus? I know the answer to that because it's one of my struggles as well. They talk about the problems of the other person, not the fact that they're not acting like Jesus in the midst of it. One of my favourite demotivational posters, the opposite of motivational posters, one of my favourite demotivational posters of all time had this caption on it. It was about dysfunction. It says, the only consistent feature of all your dissatisfying relationships is you. Now that isn't necessarily true, all right, all the time. But it does help us to focus on, I can't change the other person, but I can change myself.
That's right.
And I'm the one that Jesus is going to be looking at when I stand before him. Not my neighbours, not my spouse, not my kids, not the community that I'm part of. It'll be me. I'll be the one standing there. Jesus will be asking me, what did you do? What did you do? How did you act? So what's the solution? Well, the solution is transformation. We have to change. Jesus was accepted by sinners and tax collectors. I have no idea why the Bible makes that distinction, but it makes me laugh every time I read it. He was accepted by sinners and tax collectors. He fit in everywhere he went because his attitude was distinctly different to that of most of us. He didn't go looking for what he could get, but what he could give. We are too quick to judge the performance of others, failing to realise that the only actions that we should be judging are our own. Philippians 2, verses 1 to 11. Is there any encouragement from belonging to Christ? Any comfort from his love? Any fellowship together in the Spirit? You can see he's sort of softening them up a bit here. He's trying to get them on side. Are your hearts tender and compassionate? Of course they are, Paul. Then make me truly happy by agreeing wholeheartedly with each other, loving one another, and working together with one mind and purpose. Don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. Paul here is describing what a church that is healthy and growing and full of love is like. You must have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had. Though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. When he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on a cross. Therefore, God elevated him to the place of highest honour and gave him the name above all other names, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Jesus himself said about himself, he said this in Matthew 20:28, he said, "For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others, and to give his life as a ransom for many." If I could have the music back, that'd be great. What if you were to go through your entire life trying to love others, looking out for the interests of those around you, and yet never feeling like you're fitting? There may even be people here this morning, and that's how you feel, really, if you're honest. Feel like you've been putting out. You've been loving people, caring for people, but you still feel like you don't fit in. Should you give up trying to love those in your world? Now, your answer to that question is really important, because it challenges you to think like Jesus thinks. And unless you think like him, you'll never live like him. You belong not because others accept you, but because you are willing to love and accept them. me. It seems like it's around the wrong way. The grass isn't greener on the other side of the hill. Grass is greener where you water it. When you love and serve people, you give them the gift of life. John 1:4 says that in Jesus was life, and that life brought light to everyone. Healthy, growing, and full of love is what a church looks like that is walking in the light that Jesus brings. For us to be that type of church, every one of us needs to commit to flipping the script, to focus on giving rather than getting. And it starts with putting to bed our expectations of others and looking at ways that we can be a blessing to everyone we come in contact with every day of our lives, in the church and out of the church. That type of church has a chance of changing its community.